The Virginia Coast Reserve Long-Term Ecological Research Site was established by the National Science Foundation in 1988. This video provides a brief introduction to the research sites of the Virginia Coast LTER site. Our research sites are located on the Delmarva Peninsula on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay and consist of the islands, lagoons, and marshes that make up the Virginia Coast Reserve. Primary research sites are on Hog Island and near Brownsville at the Phillips Creek Marsh and in the intervening bay. The north end of Hog Island is one of the major research sites. It features grassland, shrubland, those are the dark areas there, along a chronosequence of dune ridges dating back to about 1870, where the ridges nearest the marshes were laid down. There are also shallow interior ponds that may on dry summers drain completely, or as you'll see coming up on the left, may be breached by the ocean due to erosion. Habitats on Hog Island include broad beaches on the northern end of the island, with their associated dune systems. There are also grasslands behind the dunes and shrublands behind those. These are primarily Myrica shrubs. There are a few trees on Hog Island, but they tend to be isolated, not forming forests. There are also these interior ponds and wetland areas and salt flats with no vegetation and hypersaline conditions. And that the backside of the island there are broad salt marshes. In contrast, the southern end of Hog Island is much narrower. This is the former site of the town of Broadwater, which used to have about 250 people in the 1800s. Now it's just a narrow upland spit of sand with grassland and some shrub cover, but not nearly the shrub cover that we see on the northern end of Hog Island. The marshes at the back form a chronosequence starting with the 1962 Ash Wednesday storm, which covered some of the marshes, and as those have merged, we've tracked those changes. We'll be taking a ground tour of this area of Hog Island in just a moment. This is the beach in that area with our friendly ghost crab. The dunes are covered with Ammophila breviculata, the American beach grass.
Some people will eat the leaves on this. It's it's called sea rockets because these look like little rockets. And the other name is beach kale. And the early settlers would come out here and harvest this and eat the leaves. But you can feel the leaves are a little bit succulent. There's a little bit of salt succulence here. They have very high transpiration rate. And this is late in the year. Usually by now it's all senescent. But we've had such a cool, wet summer, it's still growing. Usually by mid-July it's pretty much done. But it's
this plant exuded salt also.
I don't think it does. I think it's salt succulent. And if you look at the older leaves, it has indeterminate growth. It's a crucifer, so it's got this indeterminate growth. And you can see for example here, all the older leaves are all gone already. And so I think what happens is eventually the leaves...
The transfer of nitrogen.
Yeah, the salt level gets to a certain point where the leaf starts to senesce and they pull the nitrogen out and go along.
In addition to wildflowers like the marsh pink, there are three major shrubs: Iva, which is most salt tolerant; Murica, which is the least salt tolerant but the most prolific on the uplands; and then Baccharis, which is intermediate in its salt tolerance. The vegetation here is Spartina alterniflora in the background, grasses, primarily Spartina patens in the near ground, with a Murica shrub. The LTER project operates numerous boats, including this 24-foot privateer. We also have a variety of meteorological and tide monitoring stations. Phillips Creek Marsh is on the mainland as part of the Nature Conservancy's Brownsville property. The marsh itself is used to study the relationship between marsh processes and changes in sea level, particularly transitions into the upland. As you can see, it's a highly zonated landscape. By the way, the color changes here because we're using a polarizing filter to sort of highlight areas with water and then also penetrating the water. Spartina alterniflora would be in the lowest areas of the marsh. The dark patches that you see coming up are Juncus romanieris, a spike rush, and Spartina patens in the upper marsh. We have a boardwalk there and some experiments that basically control inundation of different marsh surfaces. We also have sediment erosion panels there and also a meteorological station as well. Within the lagoons are wide areas of tidal flat. Indeed, if your boat broke down while crossing Hog Island Bay, you could probably walk to shore. There's a tidal range of approximately 1.2 meters, which means that mudflats are exposed at low tide. Here are some of the lush marshes that occur in the lagoons near Wachapreague, Virginia. That's Wachapreague in the background there. Although not one of our primary study sites, Paramore Island, just to the north of Hog Island, has the widest array of habitats in the southern barrier island south of Assateague. The dark vegetation that you see there here is often trees, not just shrubs, the way there was on Hog Island. Now, the 1991 Halloween storm did significant damage to the dunes on Paramore, so you have an unusual circumstance of where the forest is right against the beach. We also have this area known as the Paramore Pimples. Basically what you're seeing there are rings of Murica, sometimes cedar, circling a small dune that then has grassland or perhaps no vegetation on the top. Southern Paramore is extremely narrow, a very narrow spit of sand that more or less every new storm cuts a fresh inlet through. As a matter of fact, most recently, right about where we're looking at now, had an inlet carved through it. This is some of the forest on Paramore, mostly loblolly pine with some holly and cherry and things like that in the understory. It also has a very healthy growth of smilax or greenbrier, very difficult to walk through. Also on the island you will find patches of Phragmites. This has started to spread in many of the mainland areas, usually at the edge of marshes, and is of some concern to the Nature Conservancy. As I noted before, the forests on Paramore are directly adjacent to the beaches. This has led to a somewhat aberrant situation where the waves are actually beating into the forest. As a result of the primary dune being decimated in 1991, the beach of Paramore sort of has that ghostly forest look to it. On the beach in Paramore, you find the wreckage of the ship S, which went down in September of 1888. It's a composite of wood and steel that is still remaining intact to this day. It's actually been moved by some of the recent storms about 300 meters south of its former resting place. The barrier islands on the Virginia coast are a very important breeding ground for colonial water birds. There are basically 23 species that breed here frequently, and they account for 72% of all of the colonial water birds known to breed on the coastal plain of Virginia. They've been monitored now for over 25 years by the Nature Conservancy, so there's a very interesting data set there. Invertebrates, be it crabs or insects, are common in all of the habitats on the Virginia coast. There are 9 species of small mammals, plus a variety of larger predators, such as raccoons and foxes. There are also herps on various islands. This is a little green snake on Paramore. Here's an aerial view of some of the islands that are less frequently used for our research, but nonetheless are an important asset for us. This is Cobb Island, which is immediately to the south of Hog Island. Like Hog, it doesn't really have much in the way of trees, but does have extensive shrub areas, some of which are used as rookeries for herons. You'll see some coming up as little white points as we zoom in. In 1997, when these images were taken, there was a old Coast Guard station on the south end of Cobb Island. The Nature Conservancy has subsequently put that on a barge and floated it back to Oyster, Virginia, where it now occupies a point next to the harbor. This is Wreck Island. Right now, very little in terms of beach development. It's sort of some beach sand and then a marsh immediately behind it. At times there have also been large piles of oyster shell out there as well. This is a state-owned island, not owned by the Nature Conservancy. On Ship Shoal Island, storms have actually pushed the beach up on top of some of the marsh, leaving it exposed. So what we have here is actually a ocean, marsh, then beach, instead of the normal sequence of ocean, beach, and marsh. Myrtle Island's undergone some dramatic changes. Take a careful look at that channel at the back of the island with that little small island in it. We'll be comparing that with the 1999 image in a moment. On the ground in 1997, we see extensive grasslands and some steep dune topography. But when we look at 1999, we see that all of that has been washed away. If you notice that channel at the back there, the island is pushed almost up to the edge of it, and areas that were marsh or grassland are now beach. This is what you would see on Myrtle Island today on the north end. Basically all of the topography and all of that extensive grassland has been washed away. This is some marsh peat that has now been exposed on the seaward side of Myrtle Island. There's still some living material in there, so it actually passed under the beach and then out onto the forefront of the beach fast enough that some of the material survived. Northern Smith Island is very similar to Ship Shoulder Myrtle Island. It's very low-lying, but southern Smith Island, which you're seeing here, is very similar to Paramore, with extensive stands of hardwood and pine. Fisherman's Island is the southernmost of the Virginia Barrier Islands and is part of the wildlife refuge. It also is crossed by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. Leapfrogging to the north, this is Cedar Island, which is north of Paramore Island. This is one of the islands that's not owned by the Nature Conservancy and actually has had some building on it. It's also experienced one of the highest erosion rates, as you can see from some of the that inlet that is over on the left-hand side of your picture was not originally part of Cedar Island. There are some buildings still remaining there, but most of them are now in peril of going into the sea. It's not exactly a good place for long-term investment in real estate, as you can see from that house on the beach. Mockhorn Island is not a barrier island, but is located inside Myrtle, Ship Shoal, and Wreck Islands. It includes some areas that were formerly agricultural, even within living lifetime. This farm here was abandoned in the 1930s following some of the large hurricanes they had then. Fisheries remain important on the Virginia coast, but they're still a pale shadow of what they used to be in terms of volume and the number of people employed in the industry. Nonetheless, working boats are still a common sight on the coast. A big change has been a move into aquaculture. This, what you're seeing there, is a set of enclosures for growing clams on the lagoon bottom. Our laboratory is located in Oyster, Virginia, and we're going to be building a new home at the Anheuser-Busch Coastal Research Center on Oyster Harbor. Oyster is located about 15 miles north of the southern tip of the peninsula, and the harbor will provide us our first lab-side water access.